There was and there never was 2 lovebirds, and they lived happily together, and they had 3 chicks. Now the husband used to go out to collect the food, and one day he went out to collect the food and he found a beautiful lotus flower, and it smelt so good and it was so delicious that he stayed longer than he should have. And he didn't notice the sun was getting higher and higher and higher, and the temperature was getting hotter and hotter, until it was too late, and the lotus flower closed around him and he was trapped. Now meanwhile the wife was at home with the chicks, and she was waiting. And as she waited, she started to get anxious. Where was her husband? And then soon her anxiety turned to suspicion. Who was he with? And then soon after that, her suspicion turned to anger. He had left her alone with 3 chicks. And she was so busy getting angrier and angrier that she didn't notice a forest fire had started, and it was getting closer and closer and closer to her chicks. And when she noticed, she tried desperately to save her chicks, but her beak was too small and she couldn't lift them. So she flew around and around the nest and watched as the fire engulfed her nest. She was still angry with her husband. And she thought to herself, I have no chicks, I have no husband, I have nothing to live for. And so she decided to join her chicks in the fire. But before she did, she vowed, loud and clear so that everyone could hear, I will never, if I am reincarnated, be with a man again. I shall never speak to men. And then she dove into the fire. Now the husband had got back just in time to hear this vow, and he saw his wife perish in the flames and his chicks, and he decided he wanted to join her too. But before he did, he prayed to the gods, if I am reincarnated, reincarnate me to be with her, to be her husband again. And then he joined her in the flames. Now the wife was reincarnated as a princess, Savannah, and the husband was reincarnated as a young man, Sapasit, and he lived in a village with very simple parents. And these parents adopted another young man, and the 2 young men became firm friends. And as time went on, they decided that they wanted to go off into the mountains and learn the art of sorcery, magic. So that is what they did. And meanwhile, Princess Savannah had grown into a beautiful young woman. But she would never speak to men. Not one man would she speak to, even her father, the king. And he knew that she spoke to women because she spoke to her mother. But she would never speak to him, and he worried. What was he to do with her? How was he going to marry her if she wouldn't speak to men? And then he decided, and he decreed, any man that could make his daughter speak would be her husband. And so princes came from far and wide, and they tried and they tried and they tried to make her speak, but not one of them prevailed. And then noblemen and merchants came from far and wide, and they tried and tried to make her speak, but to no avail. By this time, Sapasit had learned all the arts of magic, even to take his own soul out of his body and put it into other things. And his companion had learned these things as well. And they came back and they heard about Princess Savannah, and Sapasit couldn't help himself. He had an urge to try his luck. So they went to the castle. And he asked the king, and the king agreed he could try his luck. And he turned to his friend and he said, take your soul out of your body and put it into the door, and I shall talk to you. So they went up to the princess's chamber, and his friend took his soul out of his body and he put it into the door, and Sapasit said, door, this princess won't talk to me, so I'd better talk to you. Do you have a story for me? And the princess was surprised, because the door responded. I don't have a story, said the door. I'm just a door. All I do is open and close all day long. I don't hear stories. Why don't you tell me a story? So Sapasit agreed, and he told the door this story. There was and there never was 4 friends, and these 4 friends did everything together. And the oldest was a fortune teller, and the next one was an archer, and there was another one that was a diver, and the other one was a magician. And they went around the world together. Now one day they were down on their luck, and one of the younger ones turned to the fortune teller and he said, fortune teller, we've got no luck. Why don't you look into the future and see if we're going to get some? So the fortune teller, he got out his charts and read some tea leaves, and he found out that they were going to be in luck. Very soon an eagle would come past clutching a princess. And very soon an eagle did come past clutching a princess, and the archer shot his arrow at it and wounded the eagle, and it dropped the princess into the sea. So the diver dove in and got the princess back, but she was already dead. So the magician, he brought her back to life using his magic ways. "Now, Door," said Prince Sappersit, "which of these four should be her husband? Who has the greatest claim?" And the door responded, and it said, "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? The one that should marry her is the fortune teller, because without that fortune told, they'd never have known that the princess was coming." Now the princess was listening, Princess Savannah, and she could hold her tongue no longer. She jumped forward and said, "Door, don't listen to a stupid door. What does a door know? It shouldn't be the fortune teller. It should be the magician, because without him she would still be dead." Now no sooner had the words come out of her mouth than the orchestra that was waiting outside her window to hear if she would speak struck up a happy tune, and everybody celebrated because Princess Savannah had spoken, and it was Sappersit that had made her do it, and so they were married. And it wasn't long before they were happily married, and Sappersit was now a prince. And one day he was out in the woods and he saw a deer, and he thought to himself what fun it would be to put his soul into that deer and go darting off into the woods. So he turned to his companion, who was always with him, his trusted great friend from his childhood, and he said, "If I go into that deer, will you look after my body?" And his friend promised he would. So Sappersit took his soul out of his own body and put it into that of the deer, and off he went. Now his friend, the companion, sat and waited with Sappersit's body, and he waited. And then he got to thinking how nice it would be to be a prince. How nice it would be to be married to the Princess Savannah. And he had a wicked idea. And he took his soul out of his own body and he put it into his friend Sappersit's body. And once he was in there, he burned his own body and he went back to the castle. Now Princess Savannah knew her husband very well, and she knew that there was something strange about him that day, that he was behaving very differently. So she kept a wide berth and observed him. And Prince Sappersit, the real Prince Sappersit, came back from being a deer and having a frolic and saw what had happened. So he took his soul out of the deer and he put it into a parrot, and then he flew back to the castle, where he went in and found the princess, and he told the princess what had happened. And the princess and him came up with a plan. The next day there was going to be a big fair, and there would be music and dancing, and villagers would come from far and wide to celebrate, and a goat would be slaughtered. And when that goat was slaughtered, Princess Savannah turned to the counterfeit Prince Sappersit and said, "Why don't you, darling, show everyone your wonderful magic? Why don't you bring that goat back to life?" And the counterfeit Sappersit couldn't help himself. He wanted the adoration, so he took his soul out of the body of Prince Sappersit and he put it into the goat, and he began to do a merry dance as the goat, and everyone was laughing. But the real Prince Sappersit had taken his soul out of the parrot and jumped straight back into his own body. And no sooner had he done so than he shouted loud and clear so everybody could hear, "That goat is rather peculiar. I think we should kill it and feast." So that is what happened. Princess Savannah and Prince Sappersit lived happily ever after.